Okay, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who were at the meeting on Turkey this morning, I apologize that you have to see me again all afternoon as well. But if you weren't there, then that point is irrelevant. So welcome to this EPC European Foundation for Democracy policy dialogue, which is part of a series that we have since the beginning of the year on a broad project dealing with the challenge of jihadist radicalisation. And the main topic of today's event is the geostrategic aspect of this radicalisation. I think it's becoming evident that the terrorist network or terrorist networks are spreading. I mean, not just between localised states, but in fact in a global as a global phenomena, because you can now see that organisations such as Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, ISIS, have established cells or networks in different regions throughout the world, whether that's in Europe, Central Asia, or the Far East, or of course in the Middle East. And all of these regions are connected one way or another, which is quite a horrifying scenario, and a scenario to which we don't really have, in the West or the international community, a proper response yet in how to eradicate it. And of course these networks, these cells, are targeting local communities, government authorities, and vulnerable and often disillusioned communities and people who exist in these countries, and involve them into this radicalisation process, which often ends in these poor souls becoming foreign fighters travelling to Syria and elsewhere. So this policy dialogue, which is going to be split into two panels, is going to look at the different experiences of a number of different regions and countries, both in the EU's neighbourhood, but also further afield, looking at a number of key issues with which they're dealing with, and the key questions that need to be answered. For example, what options does the EU need to take in order to strengthen counter-terrorism cooperation with external partners, and what do these partners themselves need to do to strengthen their own fight against terrorism and radicalisation? I think another issue that we need to look at is actually where these groups come from, how they're financed and supported. So, for example, to what degree does a country like Saudi Arabia, which finances, let's say, an agenda of, let's say, mosque building, education, organisations, etc., in different parts of the world, including quite strongly, actually, in the Balkans, to what degree do they need to be made more accountable for pushing this, what I would say, this Wahhabi agenda, which often results in radicalisation of many people in different regions around the world. So the first panel, which I'm moderating, is going to be looking at the Western Balkans, at Turkey, Central Asia and the South Caucasus. We were supposed to have a speaker from Azerbaijan here today. Unfortunately, for health reasons, he couldn't make it. But our speaker from Turkey, Hussein, is also going to cover the South Caucasus region. And last but not least, the region that we call, AFPAC, so Pakistan and Afghanistan, and this phenomena there, which goes back, in fact, many decades, if we're talking about Afghanistan at the very least. So I'm going to introduce them very briefly. For those of you who weren't with us this morning, we have Hüseyin Bahçe, who's Professor of International Relations at the Middle East Technical University in Ankara, here on my right. To my immediate left, Vlado Azinovic, Assistant Professor, Department of Peace and Security Studies, School of Political Science at the University of Sarajevo. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Zahid Hussein, who is a very well-known academic, journalist, and writer of a number of books. So welcome to all of you here today. Thank you for travelling, because you've all come quite some distances to be here. And I'm going to ask Professor Bahçe to start us off. You have up to 15 minutes to tackle quite a broad topic.
Thank you, but still we have to stop me because I'm like an Arab horse, you know. If I just start go and go and go with the increasing speed, and I hope that nobody is sleeping after this heavy lunch. First of all, the topic is important. Turkey is one of the countries at the moment which is very much criticized to be the headquarter even for some ISIS people. In the last 1 year, my research concentrated also a lot of on these issues. We have published last year a book together with some others with the title Islamic State, the New Global Jihadist Phenomenon from the University of Autonoma in Portugal. And I have been writing there the recruitment of ISIS people as well as PKK's recruitment, how they address to the people, how they approach, what instruments they use. And the second one was also about this issue, looking from the geostrategic perspective. Last year in Singapore, we had a conference, and I was speaking also from Turkey, how Turkey is affected and what Turkey can contribute. And definitely also in question and answer period, I will tell you some interesting information, I hope. For example, only 2 countries help to Interpol in this respect, at best, Turkey and China. It is the view of Australian origin Interpol man in Thailand, who has been also participating at the conference in Singapore. And here, in this publication by the German Adenauer Foundation, the Politische Meinung, I gave an interview with the title "The New Terror Wave." In July-August edition, the article will come. It is much longer, so around 15 pages. I just tell you this because you have to know whom you are listening, and also that I'm coming from Turkey, living in Turkey, and traveling, but also living in Turkey, like a fish in an aquarium. You are looking from outside to aquarium, and we, like fish, living in this aquarium, and we move from here to there, from the city to villages. And when 2 bombings have taken place in Ankara, in the last one, where more than 40 people lost their lives, I was just a couple of kilometers distant from the place. And it is a different feeling, I can tell you. There is a classical concept. If you are not part of the problem, you don't care. But if you are part of the problem, then you have a different attachment to the problems. And this new wave of terrorism is also best written by Peter Newman from the King's College. He is now running around the world telling to many institutions what is it. The New Jihadist is the title, Neue Jihadisten, published in Germany, the book. And he was telling 4 different waves of terrorism. And at the moment, what we have at the global level, terrorism, it is also part of our Turkish reality. We have 2 types of terrorism in Turkey, one PKK terrorism and the other one ISIS terrorism. So we categorically 2 different, I would say, events. PKK terrorism is totally different as ISIS one. And I will make these differences. Francis Fukuyama was speaking a couple of weeks ago to German newspaper Die Zeit. He was saying that the biggest problem of the democracies, that the democracies could not create an identity. We still have ethnic identity problems. In America, for example, you are coming from any other country, religion whatsoever, but you are an American. And political identity. American is somebody who has this political identity, which is a democratic one. In Turkey, at the moment, what we see with PKK is that we are not able to create a democratic identity, though we hoped to create this, but ethnic differences are still there, and this ethnic terrorism is not something that you can solve it in a very short period in a democratic country if you really use the democratic instruments. The recent publication by Noam Chomsky just came out into the market with the title, Who Rules the World? This is the one. The second, the mastermind of international politics. Who are the masters of international politics? In the beginning, it says, in the world we have two superpowers. One is the United States of America, and the other one, public opinion, international public opinion, because the perception, what you have in the mind. This morning we have been debating whether Turkey is a safe country or not, how the countries react to terrorist aggressions. Brussels is less secure than Ankara, I would say. If you take the events, what happened, and I must tell you, I arrived yesterday, and when I saw the military men, soldiers, in front of the restaurants, I said, welcome to the hell. It's not so much different than in Ankara, so I felt at home. Believe me, I felt at home. So this is, but one side. The issue is we are at war. The democratic country is now at war with terrorism. And this terrorism is a global phenomenon. It is not only just for one country. It is a phenomenon that every country is attached, and the democratic countries have more difficulties how to deal with these problems. And I will tell you now how Turkey is doing this. Most of them, of you here, you followed the case of Can Dündar, the journalist, together with Erdem Gül, that they are accused to violate the state secrets because they did find out that there are some weapons which have been transferred to Syria. And in Adana, these cars have been taken, and the weapons are there, and we have a domestic discussion. But the problem is here, Turkey has been, ladies and gentlemen, one of the countries which has been directly influenced by the ISIS activities inside of Iraq, inside of Syria, and as well as in Turkey. And I give you many other concrete examples, because Turkey, since until the meeting of NATO countries in Wales 2 years ago, was considered as the country which is helping ISIS. It is the perception, it is the idea. But since this NATO meeting, Turkey has declared openly that ISIS is the enemy of Turkey, and this since then Turkey became also one of the targets of ISIS activities, and probably it will continue to be. The issue is here, I would say, how Turkey is dealing with this ISIS terrorism. Or can Turkey deal with this? Turkey has 910-kilometer borders with Syria. If you take also to the Iraqi border, it takes more than 2,000 kilometers. And the Turkish borders are like Swiss cheese. It is a cheese, but with a lot of holes. It's not like Dutch Gouda, yeah? Strongly controlled. In order to go to the other side, you have to cut it down. So we eat also cheese, but like Swiss cheese. And in Turkey, there's a city called Kilis. Kilis has been the main place for all these foreign fighters, and you definitely heard or read the numbers of this. Peter Naumann is giving all the numbers in his publication. I don't need to repeat here. But in Kilis, for example, there is a hotel called Istanbul. From Europe, from all over Asia, The people come there, and they are a bunch of idiots, some of them, because they just want to live in war conditions. I mean, psychologically is not acceptable, but the people want to go there because of all these games, Atari games, whatsoever, all these war games are going to be realized there. ISIS is a phenomena. It is a phenomena, is there, and it is also the failure, to my view, American policy when America was, Michael Bremer was just dissolving the 450,000 strong army of Iraq, and the children and the young boys from this period, now big men, and they want to get the revenge of their fathers because the entire nation has been humiliated. It is a psychological reaction also by those people, and I can only assure you that in the world there are enough people who have interest to finance this type of organizations, and we know it is called Toyota wars. All these ISIS people drive Toyota. When you look at all the very new one, brand new, and the question is here, how is it a Turkish problem, or is Turkey part of the problem, or is it that Turkey responsible for this because the people came and went via Turkish-Syrian border to those people, to Raqqa or to another places? I think we have to be very careful with this, because the democratic countries, and Turkey is a democratic country. This morning we have been talking about Turkey, but I still insist that Turkey is still a democratic country, and in democratic countries you cannot tell the people not to travel. It is not Russia, it is not North Korea, it is not China that the people will be kept at the border. And when I do travel to those countries, I see this. In democratic countries, if you have the passport, Dutch passport, British passport, Belgian passport, doesn't matter which color, which religion you have the right to travel, unless Interpol, the secret intelligence organizations of the states, come together and inform each other on the right time. Once again, this is one of the mistakes of the Turkish government in the very beginning, that they could not control the borders. The problem of Turkey, that Turkey has not been able to control the Syrian border. This German patriots or Dutch patriots which have been put down on the Turkish-Syrian border, it was not helping that there is a trade between the borders. Even Red Bull is sold, oil, gas, whatever. The people fight in Iraq, in Syria, and come in the evening to the Turkish hospitals. This, I told you.
I'm not. Okay, I will ask you a couple of specific questions.
Okay, but just let me say this one. If somebody comes and tells, no, in Turkey we don't have ISIS people, it's not true. In Turkey we have a lot of ISIS sympathizants as well as ISIS people. Some of them are in prison, but they are not so publicly persecuted because the government is afraid that they can undertake certain terrorist activities. And in recent days, and I know some background information also, how those, some of them have been catched before they attacked certain institutions and certain developments. But one point before, the Turks, and this is very psychologically important, they are not afraid from terrorism. So they are not going back and not going to the streets. On the contrary, they say, terrorists, go hell with them. We continue to live. It is the life. I love it. Yeah, this is only country which is resisting against terrorism. Yeah, ISIS people, okay, we know them, okay, but the government will deal with this. This type of trust to the state is very important. And now we see first time that Turkey and the European Union, as well as NATO, is acting much more together. In the first couple of years, 2011, 13, 14, definitely the Turkish policy can be criticized. The Turkish borders were out of control, and thousands of people from this side and this side went, and Turkey is at the war and facing ISIS threat and will continue to face the threat. I have said also here, Turkey is one of the target countries of ISIS terrorism. So because you are a target country, you have to develop certain policies. I'm sorry, I'm too loud and too fast, but in question and answer period, I can answer because I'm full until here with ISIS.
It's true what you said about Turks not being, afraid of terrorism, because yes. I remember when I was in Antalya in the 1990s, when you would go on the beach in the summer, the security forces would actually come and scan underneath sunbeds for bombs from the PKK, but it didn't deter Turks from going on holiday and lying, on those sunbeds. So I agree with that. But two very short questions. Yeah. Could you estimate how many, terrorist cells, ISIS terrorist cells, are currently in Turkey, and what specific action is actually being taken by the government to tackle this? Because often we're given the message that they're not taking very significant steps at all. And what sort of cooperation is going on between Turkey and the EU? We heard significant criticism from President Erdogan over the EU's reluctance when Turkey warned them about two of the suicide bombers that blew up themselves in Zaventem airport. So what sort of cooperation? Is there room for more cooperation?
We have information by the state and information by the newspapers. We do not know exact numbers, but not less than 20,000. Not less than 20,000. This is very interesting. We have, once again, also those people recruited from Turkey. Ankara is one of the places. In Istanbul, for example, there are. In small cities like, not small, but compared to Istanbul and Ankara, like Bursa, we have this. So ISIS has been also recruiting people who had this type of rejection of the state, tempting to make money, because they offer also a lot of money, $400, $500 or $3,000 per month. The people go, fight, and come back. So it is like employment agency, if you want. ISIS, a new employment agency. The Turkish security forces, police, here, and Turkish Secret Intelligence Service, they know, when you look to the former Prime Minister Davutoğlu's statements, he said, we know how many actually there are, but we cannot catch them before they operate. So first they operate, and then the people are catched. Just yesterday, the governor of one city said that in the last week they collected several ISIS jihadists who wanted to make in Turkey certain bomb attacks. We constantly live with this reality. But the fact is, therefore, that the state, I would say the Turkish Secret Intelligence Service is working together with the other state intelligence services now, or with the European Union in particular, as a union, and Germany, Britain, and France are the main leading countries, of course. So there is a constant exchange of the information. So since the early warning came, the Turkish police could act at the border, at the airport, or even at the sea. So there was a deficit of cooperation before. The general perception in the world that Turkey is supporting ISIS, or the government has been supporting ISIS, this is a perception which is going to be changed at the moment, because Turkey is more and more cooperating, helping with the international institutions. But this is sure, in the first 1.5 years, Turkey was not able to control the incomings and goings to the other side of the border. The reason is, I am very careful in formulating academically, because Turkey, from the very beginning, wanted that Bashar Assad is out of power. So whoever was coming and going to Syria to fight Bashar Assad was welcome. Now there is a selection process. Now not everyone can go to the other side of the border, and illegal drug trafficking, illegal trade is taking place. And now the Kurdish terrorism and ISIS terrorism is also like mishmash. It's mixed. You don't know who is ISIS and who is Kurdish terrorist. It's difficult to make the difference because they look the same. They have the same type of clothes. So it's difficult. But I make a separation here. Kurdish terrorism and ISIS terrorism, two different beer. So ISIS terrorism will remain because they consider Turkey as enemy, as a state which has to be fought. And in the long run, I will say the Turkish policy, like today, even when we talk, the bombings are going on in Raqqa. The Kurds, the Arabs, and the Turkish jet fighters and American jet fighters are fighting against the ISIS. ISIS has been the most difficult, I would say, terrorist organization to fight. Many events occurred, many, including one from Bosnia-Herzegovina, by the way, from Kosovo. People who have been working for ISIS now in Turkish prisons, but they will be not judged because this is a problem. The state is trying to extend possible the last decision. So, but Tayyip Erdogan and his government, the government and the president, they are determined now to fight ISIS because they realized that it is destroying the Turkish image, it is destroying the Turkish economy, and they should fight. I don't know how long this Syrian civil war is going on, but ISIS has the borders with Turkey. This is the reality. The Turkish flag is facing now ISIS flag, Syrian flag, and Kurdish flag. So suddenly 3 flags in our borders. Before we had only 1.
Thank you, Hussein. I'm now going to turn to your neighbour in the Balkans, to Professor Azinovic. I mean, the Western Balkans have been identified as having a serious issue of foreign fighters going to Syria, of having a serious problem of radicalisation, and also being a transit route for terrorists travelling to Europe. There was an interesting article a few days ago in the New York Times, specifically focused on Kosovo, which it says has been turned into a fertile ground for ISIS, and it cites again Saudi Arabia as one of the reasons for financing mosques, etc. So we'll be interested to hear your interpretation of the problem in the Western Balkans and what can be done about it and how the EU can play a role in that. And I think you're going to make a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Good afternoon. It's obviously a pleasure to be here and to speak in front of such an expert and informed audience. I have a quick disclaimer to make. I'm recovering from a bad cold, so I'll be coughing all the time, so please accept my apology in advance for all further episodes of my coughing. I see myself mostly as a researcher rather than an analyst, so I'll try to provide some concrete data that could help us maybe analyze things together. I'm also a professor at the university, which in turn means that I possess an unlimited powers of endless talking, usually without making much sense, so you can consider this presentation as your life savior. It is only a coincidence that next week my colleague Muhammad Yusic, a prominent Islamic scholar from Bosnia, and myself will publish a study on Bosnians in Syria and Iraq. This is actually going to be an update to our study from the last year. We'll also try to cover Western Balkans to the extent we can. So what I'll do, I'll share some of the preliminary findings from this study with you now, and then we can talk possibly about the recommendations in the follow-up discussion. So I hope we can start. Oh, yes. So what we try to look into in this research was actually the Bosnian contingent in Syria and Iraq. We are talking about radicalization today, and departures to Syria and Iraq are the most visible result of this process in Bosnia and Western Balkans over the last 4 or 5 years. This phenomenon is now subsiding, but I'm sure that this set of ideas behind these departures will soon produce new security challenges. So we looked into these questions. We basically tried to establish the identities of these individuals because there were lots of different data floating around about the exact numbers. It's a very tricky and complicated procedure, and it's impossible to determine the exact number of foreign fighters for a variety of reasons. We tried to look into the patterns of travel, geography of the phenomenon, the importance of Bosnian diaspora. There's almost 2 million Bosnians living mostly in West European countries and the United States, and they play a very important role in the process in many different ways. We also looked in the usual types of features, pre-departure criminality, and of course motives for departure. The radicalization process that usually precedes these departures depends on a number of factors that are very active in Bosnia. First and foremost, it's a militant Salafi movement, which has been present in Bosnia for a number of years. These ideas were introduced to Bosnian Muslims at the beginning of Bosnian War in mid-1990s with the arrival with foreign fighters. So quarter of a century later, Bosnia, from a country which used to be a destination country for foreign fighters, turned into a country of origin for foreign fighters, and that's precisely because of the ideological influence of these guys and what they introduced. Of course, recently we observed, even before, but it's been a public phenomenon now, the role of the so-called parallel structures that operate out of the jurisdiction or umbrella of the official Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they're actually producing ideas that serve as a breeding ground for recruitment of Bosnian foreign fighters. Developments in Syria and Iraq also play a major role. The ISIL's narrative. Families also play a very important role. They can virtually push people into, joining these sorts of adventures, but they can also be a very powerful deterrent. And we looked into a number of very concrete cases where family played an important role. We have an episode of mother virtually saving her son from traveling to Syria and Iraq, to a father who virtually encouraged his son to carry out the first ever suicide bomb attack carried out by a Bosnian in Tikrit. The role of diaspora is also very important, the role of women and gender also, and we were very careful, but we just couldn't help but observe the role of mental health problems in these sorts of instances. We, of course, don't have any expertise. We cannot pass judgments or establish diagnosis for a vast number of these individuals. But there is a long history of whole sort of problems that could eventually end up with health problems. And this is something that I believe needs more research. When it comes to internet and social media, they don't play such an important role when it comes to Bosnia and Western Balkans in general, because we rely more on social interaction, social dynamics. The new phenomenon, the new challenge will be what's going to happen in Bosnian prisons once an increasing number of returnees come into prison population. We don't have experience with dealing with radicalized individuals. We don't have instructions, we don't have policies as to how to handle these guys, whether to keep them separate, whether to mix them with the prison population. And I'm sure you all know that prisons, mosques, and internet are usually the main hubs for radicalization. So we may even end up as having another hub for radicalization. I already referred to numbers. This is the assessment by a London-based Institute for Studies of Radicalization. It was published in 2015. But it's not accurate, not because there was an intention to portray figures differently, but it's really very dynamic and complicated process. For the purpose of this presentation, I compiled with, I established contacts with our friends in law enforcement agencies in the Western Balkans to give us the latest assessments of numbers of people who traveled to Syria and Iraq and who are still there. So we are talking about some 900 people who over the 4-year period have traveled to Syria and Iraq. It's very difficult to determine who is still there, who came back, how many people were killed in the process, because number of problems. When you look into police files and intelligence services files, you'll see that there is a number of individuals who are simply counted as the individuals who traveled to Syria and Iraq, but we have no proof whatsoever that they really ended up there. We saw intelligence briefs saying, you know, somebody attended social gathering last night here and there, and somebody there declared the intention to travel to Syria. So without even checking whether or not this individual had eventually traveled, the name has entered a database of Bosnian foreign terrorist fighters. I'm sure it happens in other countries as well. There's a problem of diaspora. This is a police file of one particular case. A boy was born in Slovenia. He has registered residence in Slovenia and even Slovenian citizenship. But his parents were born in Bosnia. So he also acquired a registered residence in Bosnia and Bosnian citizenship. He traveled to Germany. He registered residency in Germany, and he traveled eventually from Germany to Syria. This boy's name had entered 3 separate national databases on foreign fighters. So we have instances where people are counted multiple times. And I'm sure it doesn't apply only to Bosnia and Kosovo and Albania because of huge diasporas they have abroad. When it comes to Bosnians in Syria and Iraq, the overall number for a 4-year period is about 188 individuals, and you can see the rest, I don't have to tell you. We established the exact identities of these individuals by name, so we are not speculating. However, we don't have the final confirmation, and of course we don't know how many Bosnians have traveled from Austria, from Germany, from Sweden, from Denmark, because we don't have access to these sorts of data. And these guys are registered as Swedes and Danish and, you know, Austrians, not solely Bosnians. So we looked into this community as a clan-based structure. Clan is known to be essential survivor unit in these sorts of circumstances. For our law enforcement agencies, it's very important to establish whether or not these guys are citizens, so that legal proceedings can be taken, investigations, criminal prosecution. But for us as researchers, we observe this as a community, because these people live in communities. So some of them are from Macedonia, some are from Serbia, some are from Slovenia, some are from Austrians from Bosnian diaspora in Austria and elsewhere. We also tried to establish where are the men who traveled over those last 4 years. So we believe that half of them is still in Syria and Iraq. 1/4 has returned, 1/4 was killed. Comparing to European averages, Bosnians almost have twice as much of a mortality rate, fatality rate. And we contributed actually this to the lack of training. You can probably see a lot of press reports about training camps in Bosnia. You know, these guys are not trained. There are no real training camps. I mean, camps that have training facilities. People can go to mountains, you know, and woods and forests, hide and shoot their guns, but it's not a proper training. So we believe that a high mortality rate, fatality rate among Bosnians is probably due to that. We also try to assess the number of these individuals at the beginning of 2016, and this is the ratio we came up with. What is most worrying for us is that 60% of this contingent are actually non-combatants. Can we really call all these guys foreign terrorist fighters? We don't know. We have only one woman that we know is engaged in combat actions. The same applies to individuals from Kosovo, also high proportion, high rate of non-combatants, women and children. Almost half of their contingent is also very mixed. I'll just lead you quickly through who these people really are. These are their Facebook photos. Men are mostly age 31, most frequently age 22. Many of them are still unmarried. Women We obscure the faces because we try to protect the identities of these people as long as they are considered innocent of anything. Average age of women is 30. As you can see, Bosnians are, on average, quite older than other groups in Syria and Iraq. That's one of our main findings. These people are not traveling to Syria and Iraq to fight jihad, nor they were invited to fight jihad. They are performing hijrah. They are migrating, not to come back. And that's why so many families are going there, even in 3 generations, because they see it as a society, emerging society that they feel very close to, the society which shares their belief system, the society and the state in the making that invites them to come, and they do respond to this call. Women are mostly married, as you can see. We believe that at this particular moment in time, we have almost 40 married couples in Syria and Iraq. We have at least 12 widows with 24 children, and a number of children which is really alarming. We consider a child everyone who is younger than 18. And of course, it's very difficult because some of these individuals entered Syria when they were 16 in 2013. So in 2016, they're not children any longer. So it's a very dynamic process. But the mere amount of children and minors generally is very worrying. And there are, of course, new children being born in Syria and Iraq because these are all very young families. It's maybe not so relevant, but for us in Bosnia it is. The vast majority of these people come from the Bosnian Federation, and only small portion from the rest of the country. This is the breakdown by cantons. So cantons around major cities feature rather prominently: Tuzla, Zenica, and Sarajevo. We also try to see the places with highest number of departures, and Gornja Maocha, which is traditional militant Salafi stronghold, also features very prominently, but also Sarajevo and Zenica. One of also very important preliminary findings is that Salafist movement is migrating from rural areas into suburban and urban areas in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's one of the major developments over the last couple of years. We try to look into patterns, and it's very difficult. As I'm sure you all know, there is no one unique profile that fits all. But 2 things stand out when it comes to Bosnian, and I guess most of the West Balkan foreign terrorist fighters. We had just partial insight into police files and personal data. So we established, based on that limited access, that at least 1/5 of these individuals come from Bosnian diaspora abroad, mostly in Western European countries. Breakdown of these countries is such, so Austria, Germany, and Swiss also feature very prominently. The second, and also not solely connected to Bosnia pattern, is pre-departure criminality. Also partial insight into police evidences and court files indicates that more than a quarter of these guys were either convicts or were prosecuted or were investigated by the police. The typical criminal offenses include a whole number of things, from crimes of survival to pedophilia and terrorism. We have people who have been tried and sentenced for terrorism who ended up in Syria. We had 2 co-conspirators on the attack on U.S. Embassy in 2011 who were tried and acquitted before a Bosnian court, who ended up in Syria. One of them was the first Bosnian suicide bomber. So there is a really a mixed bag of individuals there. There is also very visible affiliation of most of these individuals with known militant Salafist strongholds in Bosnia. Almost 50 or 60% of them either resided there or visited or spent summers or spent weekends or attended a seminar. So there is a very strong link to these. When it comes to patterns of travel, men traveled mostly in 2013, only to come back very shortly to Bosnia to spend a couple of months to either prepare and collect their wives to accompany them, or to marry and go with their families to Syria and Iraq. For women, the trend was the same. 2013 and 14 was the most intense time, but both for men and women. In 2015, we had no returns. And that's something that we believe confirms our thesis, that these people have no intention to come back. Of course, it's not so easy to come back any longer. We have instances, as our distinguished colleague just mentioned, of Bosnians who are fleeing ISIL, basically paying for forged Syrian passports, being stopped in Turkey and ending up in Turkey, in prisons in Turkey. And only to the very cordial and emotional relations between Turkey and Bosnia, these guys are given a chance to prove their identity, their true identity, to prove that they are Bosnians, and then they're being extraditing back to Bosnia. And these are the guys who usually enter a plea bargain, receive a 1-year prison sentence, and they basically exchange, they're trading their freedom for the safety of their families. So when it comes to motivation, we see two distinct generations of Bosnians in Syria and Iraq. The first generation, people in their mid and late 40s, people who were old enough either to join in Al Mujahideen unit that operated during the Bosnian War, or to have a cousin, a relative, a father who was someone who inspired them to embrace the ideology, because Al Mujahideen had to stop after the Dayton Peace Accord what they were told was a jihad. This was an opportunity to continue it, and that's what they saw in 2013. And of course, we have a second group of people, mostly teenagers or people in early 20s. For them, there is a whole mixed bag of motives, usually adrenaline-driven adventure, mixed with some theological concepts that they embraced. You know, this is one of the graffiti from Syria with clear reference to Al Mujahideen unit that operated in Bosnia in 1992 to 1995 as inspirational force. And you know, this is the second group of guys. This is a testing picture for me. I show this picture to 16-year-olds and ask them, what do you think about this? What does it look like to you? And I always get a typical answer, 4 words: cool. This is cool.
It is cool too.
This is cool. You know, before the events in Syria began, people of this age in Bosnia, they usually try desperately to join French Foreign Legion, because that also provided lots of incentives for these kinds of self-validation motives that these guys harbor. So, of course, we don't believe that socioeconomic reasons are the ones that are really pushing these guys into traveling to Syria and Iraq. Bosnia is in constant economic crisis for almost a quarter of a century. So, you know, we have huge unemployment rate. We have huge unemployment rate among youth age 15 to 24, highest in the world. Almost 63% of people age 15 to 24 have no job. There is a World Bank study from a couple of years. 80% of those who don't have job are not even trying to get one. Basically, typically people were escaping from something and seeking something. This is the list of the usual things that we can attribute to both categories. But it's also, I think...
But if unhappy marriage is the reason, is...
Well, yeah, you would be surprised. I'll just drive you through a couple of villages. These are authentic photos of the houses and villages these people usually come from. Journalists usually visit houses of the guys who got killed in Syria and Iraq. In some instances, there's no road whatsoever to these. But then, you know, when I show these pictures to my students and colleagues, you know, they observe, I mean, 60% of Bosnians live in these sorts of conditions anyway. You know, so it's not poverty that drives these people. And, you know, I teach history of terrorism, among other things. And I always remember Aum Shinrikyo, you know, in Japan, in early 1990s. You know, cult whose leader believed that he was incarnation of Judah in Christ, who accumulated almost $1.5 billion in assets and cash, and some 40,000 believers who thought that the end of the world is coming and that we all should be prepared to die. They were ready to die, but the rest of us were not. So they were developing weapons of mass destruction. They tested out in Tokyo subway in 1995. So you don't have to be poor to believe in whole sort of things. Again, those houses. These are, I won't read this, but you know, it also describes, it sets these guys, it provides a niche from their social and economic niche from which they come from. Usually lots of children, no job. when it comes to radicalization, recruitment, we believe that initiation through a human touch is how it starts in Bosnia. In small congregations, usually in those parallel structures, those parallel jamaats or parallel masjids that operate completely out of control of the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina. These are the main hubs for these ideas. And of course, the ISIL narrative, as I mentioned earlier, is also serves as an incentive to someone. You know, I guess for a reasonable person, this sort of incentive would, you know, mean nothing because it's insane. But I'm going back to mental health issues. We had 2 terrorist attacks last year in Bosnia by individuals who suffered from mental health issues. They were not members of Salafi community. They didn't sport beer, they didn't wear shortened trousers. They just attended a couple of those meetings. They just rubbed shoulders with someone, with wrong people at wrong time. And at some point in time, 3 days after the Paris attack, and in April last year, they simply detonated themselves into committing horrible acts of terror. So we don't know what kind of, and you know, the BEAC provides a whole set of ideas. If you cannot perform hijrah, why don't you do something in Bosnia? Bomb Japanese embassy in Sarajevo, or attack Saudi diplomats in Tirana, Sarajevo, and Pristina. You know, people from the region are sitting in the editorial board there. They're introducing ideas. And of course, there are local forces. This is Bilal Bosnic, who is considered as the chief recruiter in the Western Balkans. I served as a witness, as an expert witness for the prosecution in his case. He received 7 years. There's an appeal process going on. Both the prosecution and defense appealed, so we're waiting for the outcome. But this guy is responsible for a few dozen departures to Syria and Iraq. He's not only a self-proclaimed imam, he's a healer. And a lot of these guys who suffer from, they confess to suffering of, you know, they've been haunted or possessed by evil spirits. So they come to treatment, and he treats them. And vast majority of these guys ended up in Syria. Some of them converted first and then traveled to Syria and got killed. This is an attacker on 2 Bosnian soldiers 3 days after Paris attack. He was watching TV coverage from Paris. Earlier that morning, he renewed his job application at the local employment bureau. But he lost his mother at the age of 6. He watched her committing a suicide by jumping into a well. He never reconnected with his father. He never approved of his father marrying another woman. He lived in the same house with his father, but never exchanged a word with him. He ended up using drugs and selling drugs. And at some point in time, something happened in his mind. He attended a couple of those Salafi meetings in Sarajevo suburbs. This is one of also main key findings. It's the Sarajevo suburbs and Zenica suburbs that are now serving as, you know, places where those hubs are being established. And we are always worried because of the social impact, not only because the social consequences and problems usually create security ones, but simply because, you know, things that I'll just briefly show you. Father of 5 left for Syria. He was killed in a matter of weeks. A wife and 5 children still live in this house. Nobody is taking care of them. We don't know what his 3 sons are being told about their father's death. Should they avenge his death? Should they come to Syria to do it? Can they do it in Bosnia? How? Who's talking to these children? Who is raising them? We have a husband and wife. They left to Syria with 9 children. The youngest was 5 months old at the time of departure. This is a woman, a mother of 2 and wife. She abandoned her husband to marry this guy she met on the internet. He's Bosnian, living in France, a drug addict and convict as well. They met for the first time in virtual world and ended up in Syria. This is ISIL's wedding gown and their wedding picture. This is their newborn child in Syria. The man was killed on February 12th. She's the only Bosnian woman that claims to be in combat missions, but we don't know. This could be anyone. This is one of the rituals when people are joining ISIL is to tear apart their passports. That's why it's so difficult to come back later, because you don't have you know, documents. But they post these photos on the internet in order to show their divorce from an infidel apostate community. They're divorcing and embracing the new ones. And this is also her claiming to be part of an execution of a spy from Al-Hansa brigade in which she claims she serves. Again, we don't know who this is and what happened here. And of course, the alarming number of children we are seeing in Syria and Iraq. We just obscured photos because of the privacy of these. And we tried to see what threats emanating from these sorts of developments. We see returnees as a possible threat because we don't have, like many other countries, we don't have risk assessment tools. We don't know. These guys can help us develop authentic counter-narratives maybe, but they can also be employed by organized crime. They can also be employed by terrorists. We have a lot of unaccomplished fighters, people who desperately want to go and to travel, but they can't. We don't know what they can do in order to compensate for the lack of opportunity to go. Maybe they can do something. Parallel structures are still within the Islamic community or outside the Islamic community are still providing lots of ideas, incentives, money, and they pose a threat. Of course, ISIL's narrative, and of course, political context in Bosnia. We don't believe this is the major, the radicalization into Salafist militant movement is not the most threatening security risk in Bosnia. We live in a rather dysfunctional country. We live in a country with a peace agreement that didn't resolve the fundamental issue of which the war had been fought, whether this is divided country or it's unified. So we have, political parties in pursuit of the exact same agendas as a quarter of a century ago, but pursuing it with peaceful means thus far. But every single issue we are talking and discussing about, including this one, has to be assessed from that particular perspective of a failed state or a failing state. I'm sorry, I ran out of my cards, and I don't know how much time will I have to address your questions, but please feel free to get in touch at any time for any follow-up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and sorry, of course, for...
Second.
No, thank you. That was fascinating.
Thanks.
Worrying, but fascinating. Maybe before I turn to the next speaker, you could just say a couple of words about the approach of the state, the Bosnian state, towards countering this radicalisation and foreign fighters phenomena.
Sure. Initially, I don't think that they understood the complexities involved and threats emanating. So there was some arm twisting on behalf of the international community, mostly the Americans. But now there is a broad understanding and broad consensus, and there is a new strategy that is in place since July 2015 for prevention and combating terrorism. So there are mechanisms and tools in place, and they seem rather effective. But my major concern is, what are we doing as a society to prevent these things from happening? Because I believe that, police and judiciary should be a last line of defense in a democratic society. Unfortunately, we as citizens, not only in this particular area, we abdicated our responsibility for the future of the country. And we are watching this like some of those stupid reality TV shows, as if it's happening to somebody else, until somebody we know is killed. And then we scream, what is the police doing? What is the judiciary doing? But what are we doing as citizens? What am I doing as a teacher, as a parent? The role of media and academic community, civil sector, religious communities, they all have a role to play in order to, prevent these things from happening. And that's not happening yet. So I think we need to raise awareness, but it's very difficult. In an identity-based society, raising awareness about problems within one identity is actually exposing that particular identity to whole sort of troubles and other identities in retrospect. So we have to approach these issues very respectfully and I think with responsibility because of wide counter effect that it can create in the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to turn to Professor Zahid Hussain, who has travelled from Islamabad to be with us today. So he's going to offer his perspectives from his part of the world, and of course, you know, the experience that Pakistan, Afghanistan has been through during the last decades in dealing with radicalisation and the routes that have come from, particularly Afghanistan, to Syria and Iraq today. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. This AFPAC, you are very familiar with that. In fact, actually, jihadi radicalization is nothing new to this region. If I may say so, it can be called the birthplace of jihadi radicalization. Whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS, it has roots in that region. It goes back to 1980s. I will not go into detail, but just for reference, it was a time when this jihad against Soviet Union attracted Muslim militants from all over the world, and that was actually justified by the West, the Saudi Arabia, and all the Muslim countries were behind it. It was so not surprising that when we talk about radicalization or jihadi movement all in the Muslim world, you will find names of what are they called as Afghan war veterans. It was Osama bin Laden was actually came there for first time in 1980s. Zawahiri, who is now heading Al-Qaeda, also basically the product of that jihad. And the last one, Zarqawi, who could be called as the founder of ISIS. They all spent time in that region, what is we call lawless region of a tribal area in northwest Pakistan. They all fought in Afghanistan. And after the end of Soviet domination, they scattered and spread all to their countries, fighting for the new jihad. And that's where we saw what happened in Algeria, Egypt, and other places. Continuing civil war in Afghanistan after 90s, after the Soviet left Afghanistan, and also the West dropped Afghanistan, what we saw actually that Afghanistan became the hub of international terrorism. And it ought to be, because civil war and the failed Afghan states became the main and very favorable destination for all the jihadis from across the Muslim world. That was also a time when Osama bin Laden, Zawahiri, all they came back to Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda was born there in 1990s. And what we saw actually happening, all actually, that it has roots there. 9/11 happened, the world has changed since. Yesterday's jihadis or freedom fighters became terrorists. They were involved, in fact, actually, what happened in 9/11. And that was the purpose to it. Osama bin Laden has been quoted saying, and other militant Al-Qaeda leaders have quoted that they deliberately did 9/11 to draw West actually into Afghanistan. And it did happen. And it's not actually surprising that most of them, Al-Qaeda, moved to Pakistan. The tribal area, which has been very familiar to them during Soviet war, when they came here to fight a jihad against infidel communist regime. It is also because it also became favorable for them, because not only that this region was familiar, but they have sympathetic elements there to provide them kind of support network. They lived there. They actually started a new war in Afghanistan. And that was the beginning of new jihad for them, an international jihad for them. And it was kind of, I will say, a repeat of them. To some extent, it was a repeat of 1980s. Muslim militants from all across the world came and found their heaven in Pakistan's tribal areas. Pakistan has actually a history of militant groups, which basically were very active in Pakistan. They had actually developed very close relations with the Taliban, which came to power in Afghanistan, and also they developed some kind of linkages with Al-Qaeda. Most of the Pakistani militant groups, which obviously worked at that point of time under the state patronage, had also actually got training in the Al-Qaeda camp before 9/11 happened. So 9/11 happened, and the invasion of Afghanistan, and war came to Pakistan, in fact actually being fought on both sides of the border. Almost all the Al-Qaeda leaders and Taliban leaders basically came across the border, and they made Pakistan as a new sanctuary. Pakistan became a new ally of United States, because when I say new allies, because what happened in 1980s, Pakistan was a basically most trusted ally of the West at that point of time in the fight against Soviet Union. And there was a gap then 10 years where the relations between the two countries became very tense, in fact. In Afghanistan, Pakistan and the United States had a different and a divergent policy. Pakistan was supporting the Taliban, and obviously the West has a different position on that. Well, actually 9/11, what happened? Pakistan became an ally of the United States yet again to fight another battle war. First, in 1980s, Pakistan was a frontline state. And the night after 2001, Pakistan became yet again a frontline state, but for a different kind of war. It was a war to wind up or to defeat those elements which basically developed in 1980s and has roots there. Initially, and that was the reason when we saw the war coming to Pakistan itself. All those militant groups which had been fighting at one point Pakistan's battle and Taliban's battle in Afghanistan turned their guns to Pakistan against the Pakistani regime. And that was basically, they said that the main accusation was a betrayal of jihad. Until 2004, most of the Pakistani militants were interested in fighting across the border against the American forces. But what happened in 2004, when Pakistan sent their troops in tribal areas, things started changing. There was Al-Qaeda declared a war against Pakistan, and so its sympathizers also actually declared a war on Pakistani state. Still, the war remained confined to tribal areas. It did not actually spill over into the mainstream. But 2007 was another turning point. When militants who were supportive of Al-Qaeda were actually had taken control of a mosque in Islamabad. You might have heard about this Red Mosque. Red Mosque was the place then when military operation took place, and that was a huge turning point. War from Pakistan's tribal area spilled over to the mainland, and mainland actually that until that actually we have not seen only a few incidents of suicide bombing, a few incidents of terrorism inside the mainland. But 2007, that what is called raid on the Red Mosque, changed the whole situation. Suicide bombing, in fact, actually about hundreds of suicide bombing has taken place since then. And that's also very interesting that suicide bombing, even during 1980s, we have not seen any incident of suicide bombing. That was not the culture of Afghans. And there were only 2 incidents of suicide bombing, and that both involved Arabs. Was what when Azam was killed in Peshawar, that was also that bombing, suicide bombing was carried out by an Arab. Another one in Kunar province, which was also controlled by Salafis. And that was the only two incidents we have seen of suicide bombing. But, and even in Afghanistan, initially resistance, actually we have hardly seen any incident of suicide bombing. So what happened? It was like actually the clerics and radical clerics had given a fatwa that it is justified, because Pakistan was not actually, according to them, a Muslim country anymore, but an alive United States. So they justified the suicide bombing because they felt actually that that Pakistan was directly, or Pakistani forces were directly involved in whatever was happening in Afghanistan. Since then, we have seen about 60,000 people being killed in Pakistan alone. And if you see Pak and Pakistan combined, probably more people have died in this region than probably in more than in even Iraq, and now which has been fighting. And this is still continuing. So what's the situation now? And that's also the period when we saw in 2007 the rise of Pakistani Taliban. Before that, we had not seen Pakistani Taliban exclusively. They were part of, in a way, extension of Afghan Taliban, and they had certain kind of affinity with Afghan Taliban. But in that actually, the birth of Pakistani Taliban gave a new twist, a more dangerous twist to the Pakistani militancy. They basically, they had at one point, they have captured or had the control, established control over the entire tribal region, where Pakistani state has completely lost its authority. Until 2009 actually, and that is basically also became very dangerous because at the same time we saw the escalation in insurgency in Afghanistan. So basically they both combined. The time of the rise of terrorism in Pakistan and escalation in Afghanistan. So that basically there was some kind of linkages. And that's also correct that 2004 when it started, and most of the Taliban had taken refuge in Pakistan, they were basically allowed it to reorganize, and then we saw a kind of increase in the militant activities across the border. So when we're talking about in Afghanistan, a situation in Pakistan, we cannot separate the two. They basically have some kind of interlinks. And whatever happens in Afghanistan over the last 3 decades has direct bearing on Pakistan and vice versa. Now, yes, Pakistan military has actually carried out counterattack 2009 onwards. The country has managed to recover the rate of the state in the tribal areas. And also, the latest one is North Waziristan. If you are aware about the name, you must have heard about North Waziristan because it has become the most talked about region. And North Waziristan was a kind of a base area for the military, not only for Taliban, Pakistani Taliban, but also Afghan Taliban. And when you must have heard about Haqqani network, which is most active in Afghanistan. And not only that, but also Al-Qaeda. And then, and obviously, if you see the terrorist activities in mainstream Pakistan, all have roots from North Waziristan. It had become hub of everything, even the global terrorism, if you see, that has some kind of linkages to North Waziristan. And it was rightly said that Pakistan could not have fight successfully militancy without clearing North Waziristan. It has happened. And I think probably that has also showing the number of terrorist violence has decreased massively. But it's not the end of the problem in Pakistan. When we talk about, yes, actually Pakistani forces have managed to drive Pakistani Taliban from those regions. But they had that linkages, and those extremist or militant networks which had spread all over the country over the last 3 decades continued actually. And so that's why actually we saw kind of violence, some kind of lull, but then again a series of terrorist attacks. It's also likely because actually the issue was not just clearing the area, the tribal area from the militant, but also actually fighting the militant network, which was basically radicalized and provided the foot soldiers for both for the militant organization in Pakistan and across the border. Until that period, I think probably there was a state of denial in Pakistan, despite the fact that so many people, thousands of people were killed, but a state of denial. Most of the people would not, it does not mean that they were sympathetic to the terrorists, but they was not really understanding a realization about the gravity of the problem and the threat it poses to Pakistani state itself. But yet another turning point, I would say, was this 2014 December attack on a Peshawar Army public schools. That was the most brutal act of terrorism seen in the entire region. That actually shaken the country. And when we saw then, obviously, Pakistan state stepping up fight against extremism, but it did not actually really still has a long way to go. Because when have to address the roots of that, yes, actually it does actually help if you kill the leaders of militant groups or terrorist groups. But in the long term, this policy of decapitation does not work actually fully. Yes, actually it does help, but basically if you do not address the root cause and also actually take on the its ideology, and take the battle to political field, you cannot actually really actually have the control over the situation, and that's basically was missing for a long time, and it's still actually missing. In fact, actually, we saw what happened during that period is that those groups which was banned in Pakistan, they went underground, they split into the smaller terrorist groups, and it became much difficult to tackle with. Now, the other, what is basically their incentives? Number one, ideological incentive, which has the roots actually, long-term roots in the Pakistani society itself. Radicalization in Pakistan has not taken place in a day, month, or year. It is basically, as I said earlier, the roots of 1980s continued. And that was the period actually when radicalization took roots in Pakistan. That was also period actually when we saw Saudi money flowing into the country. And those basically helped in developing, establishing madrasas, religious schools in those regions. Before that, I mean, like before the first time we saw actually radicalization and the rise of Salafi Islam. Before that, actually, Pakistani did not have that kind of, popular Islam was completely different. And Salafism, we saw the rise of that. Hundreds of thousands of madrasas were established. They are still continuing to operate. More students go to those madrasas probably in some of the regions than even the ordinary and the schools there. And now, basically, the situation has, the other thing which is basically again root of radicalism, when we talk about militancy, there's also, which is basically the major problem in Pakistan, is sectarian militancy. That has also roots there. It was 1979 Iranian Revolution, which also made Pakistan a kind of hub for proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi money was basically which was used to prop up radical Sunni groups, and we saw actually that also the period when we saw sectarian violence coming to Pakistan. Radical Sunni organization like Lashkar-e-Jhang, Sahaba, and all kind of groups, they basically were supported by foreign money as well. And this is basically what saw Pakistan into grip of sectarian violence which threatens Pakistan's own social fabric. So that's a kind of terrorism, militancy, sectarian militancy. Now actually, I'll just cut to a little bit, but now what the situation when we talk about Al-Qaeda. Over the years, because most of those have been arrested, Osama bin Laden have been killed, one can say that has weakened Al-Qaeda. To some extent, decapitation has worked, but still one cannot say that Al-Qaeda is finished in that region. What happened is that most of the original founder of Al-Qaeda were killed, even Osama bin Laden has killed, but over the years it has transformed. And more radical Pakistani militant leaders of different organizations, particularly those from educated background, had actually joined the Al-Qaeda, and they became the main leaders of Al-Qaeda. There are several names which have basically had that origin into Pakistani militant groups or Pakistani religious organization became part of Al-Qaeda. And so Al-Qaeda still exists in Pakistan, but different form. Yes, actually they have received a setback. Now coming to ISIS. ISIS is a new threat, but ISIS has certainly, I always believe that ISIS is offshoot of Al-Qaeda. So basically they also have roots in Pakistan. Because quite a lot of people who are not part of the ISIS, they break away of the Al-Qaeda, they had actually some kind of roots in Pakistan tribal area or in Afghanistan. But the thing is that ISIS has the footprints in Pakistan over the last few months. In fact, last 1 year, we have seen actually many terrorist attacks having imprint of ISIS. ISIS does not actually has taken a form of organization, but it does that has influenced the young militant, young educated radical element much more. And the reason is very clear. The ISIS is very different from, not very different, but their objective may be the same. But basically because they have control over certain territory. Al-Qaeda was always a secretive organization, terrorist organization, but ISIS became much more attractive to the Pakistani militants. 3 attacks which has taken place recently. One was in a Pakistan's naval base last year, and that basically was carried out by those who sympathize with ISIS. Then actually in Karachi we saw the massacre of this one community, which called Agha Khanis. 50 people were killed, and that was also carried out by young university students who were influenced again by the ISIS. So the ISIS has some roots, and also actually lots of Pakistanis have been recruited by Saudis and others initially to fight in Syria and Iraq, and lately they have also joined ISIS. So they may not have an organizational form, but nevertheless actually they have this kind of they have more attraction for the sectarian organization as well as those militant groups. So then actually Afghanistan, for just a little bit of that. Over the last few months, we have seen also ISIS making some inroads in Afghanistan. It's also largely because of the situation is getting worse there, but they cannot really become a major force in Afghanistan for the reason that Taliban cannot actually stand them. Well, the difference between Taliban and Afghan Taliban, now I'm talking about, and ISIS, that Afghan Taliban have never have this global agenda, global ambition. They basically are more of a nationalist Afghan forces, more radical in their approach. But ISIS and Taliban are different. And that's why one of the things which we have seen lately in Afghanistan is fighting between ISIS and Al-Qaeda. In some of the areas they had second roots, but basically there has been fierce battle. And so one cannot say that ISIS can survive. And also it's a matter of culture. still ISI is seen as largely a Middle Eastern organization, which does not have that kind of, Afghanistan, they do not find that kind of niche. So ISI has presence, but still not actually present a major threat. The other last thing I would say, that future is growing instability in Afghanistan is basically has made it much more difficult to root out radicalization, or at least actually counter or contain radicalization in both sides of the borders. Taliban, one thing actually, the new Taliban, Mullah Omar was killed and the news was broken last year, but the new Amir, who was elected about a few months ago, he has recently been killed in a drone strike in Pakistan. So yes, actually, I don't agree with what President Obama has said. It's a game changer, and also actually thinks and seems very hopeful that his death will actually will be positive impact on Afghanistan's crisis. I don't agree with that. The fragmentation of Taliban, if there is any, that will lead to further problem in Afghanistan. And there's no indication as such that whoever is elected, I think probably they have already elected a new Amir, but I don't think that it will force them to sit on the negotiating table yet. They may actually, I'm not sure actually when, but maybe actually in the next few months, year, that will be different. It also depends on many things. But fragmentation of Taliban will actually allow and provide a conducive ground for that ISIS type of organization to attract more hardliners. And that is basically a kind of a major cause. So in a way, actually, I will end it with this jihadi radicalization in this region also is also, depend on how to counter it, depend on what happens in Afghanistan next. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was also a fascinating insight into, well, not just the history, but current developments in your part of the world, which we can understand as also being, very worrying indeed. So I'm now going to open the floor to questions. We have some 20 minutes. Please, can you identify yourself and your organization if you have a question? So who would like to start? Okay, the gentleman over here.
My question is with you, Vlad. I'm a Pakistani journalist living in Brussels. My name is Shiraz. You talked in your presentation, you mentioned the erosion of socio-cultural values and cultural norms, family norms. This has been an experience of my generation in Pakistan as well, who was born during the Afghan war that Mr. Jihadism talked. We see that jihadist ideology primarily militates at a different level against indigenous cultures, creative expressions, music, arts, and term it as obscene, as kufr. And then women, the freedoms and rights of women, empowerment of women, and try to focus and push her into a particular role. And then non-Muslim minorities, whatever, and this cultural diversity. Did it happen in your society as well? And can the promotion of these three figures, these three aspects, like creative arts, cultural expressions, women, and cultural diversity, counter the extremism? And secondly, a little question to Mr. Zahid Hussain, the role of curriculum and the press as well. We have seen this in Pakistan, 25 years, 30. So please talk a bit on the press and the curriculum. Thank you.
Okay, do we have another question? Anywhere? Yes, lady here, and then we'll come back to the gentleman at the front.
Hello, my name is Emanuela Hannes. I'm here at the EAS, but I've been working in the Austrian Association of Cities and Towns for integration. So my question also goes to Mr. Azinovic, asking that you mentioned there is a very high number of diaspora Bosnians, and you also mentioned Austria, where a high number of foreign fighters have gone to Syria. And I wanted to ask you whether there is any kind of insights, how much this is attributed to integration or to the way that people live in the new society, because it is a high number. And we have also seen this phenomenon that would be interesting. Thank you.
Okay, then down here at the front.
Thank you. Onur Usor from NATO. And my question is for Professor Baji. And you mentioned, first of all, thank you for this enlightened speech. And you mentioned the difference between PKK and ISIS. And I have a question about the other side of the medallion. Do you think that ISIS has teach or still teaching some of tactics to PKK on the ground? We can see after the Kobani issue, the affiliated terrorist organization of PYD is learning from tactics from ISIS on the ground, because if you look at the Turkish terrorism history, we cannot see any car bombings or suicide bombings. There are rare incidents in our history, but in recent cases, massive car bombings and suicide bombings is occurring. So can we say that jihadist radicalization is exporting their tactics to other ethnic terrorist groups? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, question here.
My name is Irfan Siddiqui, and I belong to the Jung group of newspaper, the biggest newspaper of Pakistan. I'm an editorial writer there. I want to ask Mr. Professor Hussain. In Syria right now, there's a war, right? And there's a lot of countries involved in this fight. There's ISIS, there's Turkey, there's USA, there's Russia. So people are very confused, who is Turkey trying to remove the Bashar al-Assad, and Russia looks like they're trying to support Bashar al-Assad, and the US wanted to remove the Bashar al-Assad. So there's a lot of confusion, who trying to, and all the problems facing the people of the Syria. So how are we gonna see the result of this fight, and what was the how things will be smooth for the people of the Syria?
Okay, question, Timur.
Hi, my name is Timur Duskev. I'm a correspondent of Kazan Forum News Agency. I want to ask, who can share with opinion about the situation in Central Asia of the sphere of radicalization?
Central Asia. Good.
Okay, and just behind you, there's a question. Sorry, we have to pass it back.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Turia. I work for CISI, European Trade Union Confederation. I was wondering, we've had examples now of radicalization in 3 different regions, and what I've noticed now is that there are certain reasons that were being given here in Europe, for example, are maybe not the same reasons that have been the principal ones of Bosnia, for example. We're talking about marginalized people or people who who live in poverty is a relative thing, and then in Bosnia, so everybody, 60% live in the same conditions. However, I wonder, on the other side, do you, and this goes to the theme of terrorism in general, do you think that after 9/11, the fact that terrorism was then, the war against terrorism was then declared, which also in a case opens up the entire world as a battlefield, as we didn't know exactly who we were fighting against. The war on terror was such it was not it was such an abstract abstract notion. And I'm wondering now, how do you think that this has somehow also steered terrorism in a different way today?
Okay, I'll ask the last question myself. It's to Professor Hussein. You said in the 1980s that Saudi money flooded into Pakistan to fund madrasas, etc. Is that still the case today, or has the money dried up? And if it hasn't, do you think there's enough being done by the international community to stop this sort of financing coming from, I mean, not just Saudi Arabia, but other, states who are well known for financing certain terrorist groups or elements? So Hussein, maybe we start with you.
Thank you.
And we have to have short answers because we have 10 minutes till coffee. So.
Good, shortly. First of all, ISIS. One Egyptian writer was telling in a conference when everybody was using the term ISIS, he said, look, if you read it from the return side, it is Sisi, it is the president, and if you read it ISIS, then it is the god of Egypt before it became Muslim. So we have nothing to do with this. So now Turks call it Daesh, ISIL, ISIS, whatever it is called. The fact is, it is the reaction to the American policies in the Middle East. It is, because the Americans humiliated in 2003 the Iraqis, the Arab nation. You may not do this. In the Middle East, the things are not going so as it is seen from Washington. We can read State of Denial by Woodward, also his policies, his books about Barack Obama's policies. You can also read Graham Fuller's publications, Arab Spring, etc. The fact is, 450,000 people from Iraqi army have been dissolved overnight. The Germans have been much more clever. They have been not destroying the communist army of East Germany. They went gradually. If you do it overnight, 450,000 people, you put them on the street, what else do you expect? The second point is the Kurds and the Arabs. Today they are fighting together against the ISIS, but the Arabs in Iraq in particular, they think that it is the result of the American intervention in 2003 that the Kurds got more and more autonomy. I would like to mention Syria. In Syrian case, we have two different type of the Kurds, as somebody was putting the question. Good Kurds and bad Kurds. Good Kurds are those people who do fight on the side of America and on the side of Russia against the ISIS, because they are on the front line. When you look the Russian Today television, you see how the Kurdish women, the Kurdish Peshmergas have been fighting. In the beginning of Kobani, somebody was mentioning this. Turkey was allowing to the Kurdish troops, 30,000 people. They have been passing through Turkey and going to fight against ISIS in there. It created such a huge discussion in Turkey. One of the biggest mistakes of the Turkish government has been at that time to open the border to this. Now, another point, the Russians are there. Last year in October, at the Valdai Discussion Club meeting in Sochi, President Putin, I was there, President Putin said to the Americans, tell us, where are those terrorists? Give us the coordinates, or tell us where they are not. We will find them. Since then, Russia is very strongly involved in Syria, and Bashar Assad is supported automatically by Russia. Like this morning I was giving this example, Russia is like a doctor visiting the patient, giving medicine and says, here is my telephone number, call me when you need me. So the Syrians are doing this. The Turkish-Russian difference concerning Syria is that the Turks, that the Turkish government wanted to get Bashar Assad out of power from the very beginning. because Turkey was having the same view with the Americans. The difference between Turkey and America is in PYD and PKK. For the Americans, it is not part of PKK. For the Turkish government, PYD and PKK are the same people, and I think it is so. No one can convince the Turks that PYD and PKK are not coming from the same source. Salih Muslim has been educated in Turkey. He has been received by the Turkish government by red carpet treatment. And now we have this diverging interest of Turks and Kurds in this respect. Another point, this is how we do it from Ankara. Sorry, probably from Washington you look differently, but this is so. Middle East is not anymore so easy to analyze. Graham Fuller said this. It has never been so complicated ever to make a sound analysis concerning the Middle East. So we have new actors, we have new developments, and everyone, concerning your question, today in Syria we have more than 10 countries, and we don't know what interest they have. The French are there, British are there, Turks are there, Russians are there, everybody is there. It is like, something sweet, and all the bees are running to this. Now, the question is, where are we going from now on? Whether Bashar Assad will survive or not survive. And ISIS, the role of ISIS is going to be revisited. Who has interest in it? That ISIS is there. It is not only that one country, for example, Israel. What is the position of Israel? What is the position of Egypt? China. China is part of the game. And concerning the Kazakhs-France question, first of all, the radical jihadists coming from Caucasia, from the Central Asia, and including from China, from Xinjiang region. Last year, more than 200 people have been catched before they were on the way to go to Syria to fight. So this is not a phenomena just concerning one country. The fact is, and this is my analysis, this type of jihadic aims, as my dear friend from Bosnia-Herzegovina has shown, it is something which we are not prepared to face. The democratic countries, the Western countries, we are not prepared to face this type of challenges. Putin's position that is fighting against the radical terrorists is because Russia is a target of these radical actions. And last but not least, one more. Yes, it is always difficult. Now, Turkey, we have 10 neighboring countries. 10 neighboring countries. We have 11,000 kilometer borders. And the question is, how do we protect the borders? Now, Iran is emerging, coming into the picture. Iran is in Syria. And Iran, Russia, and Bashar Assad, they establish a new alliance. And the Iranians are fighting in Syria on the side of Bashar Assad. India and China, they have great interest. For example, that in Syria, we have authoritarian secular regime because India and China, having millions of Muslims, they are very much afraid that they can also be very much affected. So suddenly, Syria became the main country, intellectually speaking. Last but not least, I'm sorry, I have to say this. We have two types of mainstream thinking. One, and I'm speaking in Brussels, and many mistakes have been done also here. We have two types of mainstream thinking. One is, many people thought that the radical Islamists can be integrated into the democratic system, so they should have the freedom to be elected, to go into elections and take part in the power positions. The other one, the other view is that the radicals can never be taught. They are enemies of the democracy, so they have to be fought. This is the dividing line now, and whether radicals will be tried to be integrated or to be fought, it is the question of today. We call it Zeitgeist in German.
Shiraz, thank you very much for your question. I think it's a very important one. I think it was Emile Durkheim, a French sociologist, who introduced the term anomie, trying to explain a society that has no norms any longer. I'm coming from such a society. You know what is my norm? To cross the main street in downtown Sarajevo with 5 stray dogs every morning for the last 5 years. People get used to whole sort of things. There's a broken window theory and so it's like that. But unfortunately, what we are experiencing in Bosnia, due to a whole lot of complexities, is a complete implosion of social norms and values that the society was based on before the war. And unfortunately, the only coherent ideology that's been offered as an alternative is the one we are talking about today. There's nothing else that is visible, that is recognizable, that people can identify themselves and accept as a universal value. Also, what is important, when they arrived in 1992, foreign mujahideen who helped Bosnians, Bosnian Muslims through the war, they told them, well, there are 2 reasons why you suffered so much during the war. And that was true, they did suffer horrible crimes. The first one is because your Christian neighbors believe that you're Muslim and they hate you. The second is because you think that you are Muslim and you are not. We are the Muslims and you should follow the suit. So some people are following the suit for a quarter of a century. And that's the ideology that aims at hijacking a Bosniak ethnic identity. Unsuccessfully thus far. I think the goal is same when it comes to Albanian identity. It's much tougher to crack than Bosniak Muslim identity. But in Kosovo and Macedonia, it works. So there's, you know, if you're Bosniak, you should be Muslim. If you're Muslim, you should be Salafi. The same applies to Albanians. People are still very resistant to it, and we are talking about minorities, real minorities. But since there is no alternative, there is no visible deterrent to these trends, we can only speculate as to how it's going to end. You were talking about creative arts and things like that. They can help. But we've seen patterns of radicalization in youth. Young boys stopping listening to the music, trying to impose this to their parents. There's conflict in parents. There's division physical between children and parents. And there's dissociation with biological family and association with the ideological family, usually of militant Salafis. That's a circle of radicalization. Now I have to take off my researcher and analyst hat and speak as a citizen. I think that an early opening of chapter 23 and 24 of European integration process for Bosnia and other countries of the region would help a lot.
Exactly.
Because it will tackle the things that plague this society: corruption, nepotism, lack of accountability, political accountability, lack of financial transparency. These are the things that could show to average Bosnian, Kosovar, or Macedonian, Montenegrin, you know, that things can be better, and that European association, accession, is not some elusive story that we don't understand and usually link only to visa liberalization. Yeah. It's something that can really make our lives better. Unfortunately, we don't have this kind of attitude from European structures, because they've been there like for 20 years and they are too emerged into, you know, something else. And of course, Bosnian political elites are not playing this game honestly, because it's not in their best interest to see political accountability and financial transparency as key pillars of the society. They can rule forever if these concepts of radicalization, of identity-based politics, of ethnocentrism instead of global centrism are being introduced and encouraged endlessly. And they're creating a society that they will be able to rule for as long as they wish. Austria Bosnians love Austria. There is no problem with Bosnian integration in Austria. They love all foreign countries. They're very productive members of societies. Austria provides them with good living. Austria provides them with means and opportunity to radicalize their cousins in Bosnia, because they take them, no, really, they take them to Austria to work on Baustelle, in the summer, illegally. They pay 2,000 or 3,000 euros. These guys come back to Bosnia. They dispense money to who's ever on their list. They also send instructions to some people what to do, where to buy land, where to build another Salafi settlement or something like that. So it's not, Bosnians have no problem with integration. They are very good at integrating and assimilating whatever. So it's not your fault. We have a lot of traveling parliamentarians from European countries trying to find out why so many Bosnians are being radicalized. So our first sentence is always, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's how people feel. In this particular, what's their identity? Unfortunately, that links us to the Shiraz question and my answer to it. That's how people feel about themselves. That's where they identify themselves with. As for the terrorism, new terrorism, I can speak from perspective from someone in Bosnia. Since 9/11, the vast majority of Bosnian Muslims who've been victims of horrible crimes during the war feel stigmatized because of certain automaticity or default association, or association by something with something that Bosnians, vast majority of Bosnians, do not support, do not subscribe to, do not participate in, but somehow they feel as if they have been linked to the ideology that they actually deplore. And that could be, and of course, when you marry this with a victimhood mentality, which is still very present in Bosnia, because everybody feels as a victim. And we were victims, but it's been 25 years since the war. 25 years since the World War II. Nobody's referring to World War II. We were listening to the Stones and Beatles. I mean, I was not born yet, but almost. We have to change, to exit this mindset of an eternal victim, because it produces a villain, eventually. That's the history of Yugoslav war and of some other wars. People who believe that they are victims of history, they usually become, forces of evil. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think curriculum, that's a major source of extremism and radicalization in Pakistan. When I'm talking about actually not what is being taught in madrasas, but also in the state schools. Madrasa education system has nothing to do with the modern world. They're still living in a time warp, and they don't know anything about it, but basically read what basically is nothing to do or has any link with the society, with the modern or developing society. But worse is basically what is being taught in the state school. That was 1980 again, actually, because lots of problem goes back to 1980s. That was also a period when we were ruled by a military dictator, Naim Zia-ul-Haq, and who basically became one of the most trusted ally of the West at that point of time, before he was killed in an air crash. But what he did actually is also Islamize, so-called Islamization of society. And first thing, what is being Islamized, two things happen. Number one, actually, changing of the curriculum in the state school. Basically, which is nothing else but, again, actually, like Islam in its own interpretation of Islam, which is being taught from the school, that created actually a mindset. And in fact, actually, that was a time when we saw the empowerment of mullahs. In Pakistan society, mullahs did not have that kind of power before 1980s. 1980s, basically, that kind of sown the roots of radicalization and extremism in Pakistani society, and we had not been able to get rid of that. So what happened in Pakistan, which is also kind of fuel extremism, is the three tiers of educational system. One is madrasas, where those people who cannot afford to send their children even a state school go there, because that provide them kind of, in a poor section of the population, with not only so-called education, Islamic education, but also, I mean, the boarding and lodging in a kind of thing, because that is 90% of madrasas provide them food as well. So that is one. And the second system is a state school, which basically the standard and the level of education has deteriorated hugely over the years, because the government is not spending that kind of money which is supposed to be. And number two, actually, the same old curriculum which was introduced, a so-called Islamic curriculum which was introduced in 1980s. Can you believe, actually, the science biology, I'm talking about senior school, they also, one chapter was jihad. So, I mean, unless you change it. The third system, which obviously we saw a growing middle class in Pakistan, they do not have trust and faith in what is being taught there. And they can afford to pay tax, and there's a mushroom growth of private schools. And their education system has nothing to do with this. I mean, they're mostly affiliated with the British school system, Cambridge and O-level. So this basically has widened the social gap in Pakistan. And that is quite dangerous, in fact. Yes, I agree with that. Basically, nothing. Poverty has, yes, to some extent, has something to do with the rise of extremism, but much more so the kind of education. So that discrimination and the disparity, social disparity, is basically created a more dangerous situation where extremist organization, militant organization get recruits from. Now coming to Saudi Arabia. Well, actually, when talking about madrasas, how do they survive? They still thrive. Yes, they may be getting funding from the, from the society, bazaar and others, but most of the funding for the radical madrasa is still coming from Saudi Arabia. The difference is, 1980, it was channeled through official sources. Now, actually, 9/11 and afterward, it is still coming. A lot of money is still coming, but through charities. And we all know, actually, how charity in Saudi Arabia work. It cannot be completely disassociated with the government. In fact, actually, I think it never ceased. Now there are much more, basically the Middle Eastern politics or geopolitics, power struggle in Middle East has also have some kind of impact on Pakistan. I mean, Iran, Saudi Arabia tussle, and that I'm afraid actually that will further increase the kind of funding coming to the more radical madrasa Salafis group, because they are seen as countering what they call Iran and Shia Islam. And also, this is basically, Saudi Arabia has also a huge role. Initially, I was talking to some police officer, I think about 1.5 years when that ISIS had just started actually emerging on the scene. And quite a lot of people from Balochistan and other provinces where this more radical sectarian organization have been operating, Saudis were recruiting fighters for Syria, for so-called moderate. I think probably most of them initially went to Jihad al-Nusra, and then later on actually some of them split and joined ISIS. But I think probably it's not in this, but one can also question, Saudi's interest in fighting ISIS. I think probably there's a big question mark over their seriousness in fighting ISIS. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry to have rushed you all with the questions, but we did run out of time, and I'm afraid I already broke into the coffee break by 10 minutes, but we still have 10 minutes for a coffee. I'd like to thank all of you really a lot for these excellent insights into the problems in your countries and regions, which I think we can see are actually huge. Hopefully, as time goes by and with better international cooperation and other actions, they will subside. So thank you again. Thank you for travelling long distances, and enjoy a cup of coffee now before we return with my colleague Andrea for the panel, which will look at the developments in the MENA region, Gulf and Middle East, which I'm sure will be equally as exciting and insightful, if I can say. So thank you.
quite fresh for someone traveling.